It was one of those nights in Paris when the city doesn't quite sleep, but it also doesn't seem fully awake. The kind of night where the streetlights cast long, soft shadows over wet cobblestones and the air smells like rain, old bread, and something faintly metallic, maybe from the Seine, maybe from the subway grates breathing steam into the cool October air. Most tourists had gone back to their hotels by now, and the late-night cafes were starting to dim their lights. But not everyone was heading home. Johnny Depp wasn't supposed to be out walking alone. He just wrapped a long rehearsal for a small theater piece he'd been quietly involved in. A passion project, nothing flashy, just words and silence and the kind of acting that doesn't need cameras. He'd slipped out the back door of the rehearsal space, hood pulled low, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn leather jacket. No entourage, no assistant, no phone buzzing in his pocket. Just him, the city, and the rare luxury of being invisible for a few hours. He walked without a real destination, letting his feet decide the route. Left at the bookstore with the green awning, right past the shuttered flower stand, straight down the narrow lane where the buildings leaned into each other like old friends sharing a secret. It was peaceful, or it would have been if not for the sound. At first he thought it was just the wind whistling through a broken grate, but then he heard it again. A soft, broken whimper, barely louder than the patter of rain on his shoulders. He stopped, looked around. The alley to his left was dark, lit only by a single flickering bulb above a rusted fire escape. That's when he saw it. A dog. Not the kind you see trotting beside well-dressed Parisians on leashes wearing little sweaters or bandanas. This one looked like it had been through a war. Its fur was matted with mud and something darker, maybe oil, maybe dried blood. One ear flopped unevenly, as if it had been torn and never healed right. Its ribs showed through its coat and its legs trembled slightly, like it wasn't sure whether to run or stay. But what really caught Johnny's attention wasn't the dog's condition. It was its eyes. Most strays would have bolted at the sight of a human, especially one appearing out of the shadows like this. But this dog didn't flinch. It just lifted its head slowly, as if it had been waiting, and those eyes, deep brown, almost black in the dim light, held something that wasn't fear. It was more like recognition, like it knew somehow that this man wouldn't hurt it. Johnny stood still for a long moment. He didn't reach out, didn't speak. He just watched, and the dog watched back. Rain began to fall harder, tapping against the metal bins and puddling in the cracks of the pavement. The dog shivered but didn't move from its spot near a dented dumpster. It didn't whine again. It just kept looking at him, steady and quiet, as if it had already said everything it needed to. Johnny exhaled slowly. He wasn't a stranger to animals. He'd grown up around dogs, some loyal, some skittish, all with their own stories. He knew that look. It wasn't begging, not exactly. It was asking. Not for food, not for shelter, though it clearly needed both, but for something harder to name. For someone to see it, to really see it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out half a croissant he'd forgotten he'd bought earlier. It was slightly squashed, wrapped in a paper napkin. He unwrapped it carefully and held it out arm low, palm open. Not pushing, just offering. The dog didn't rush. It rose slowly, stiffly, like every movement hurt. It took one step, then another, each one deliberate, cautious, but never breaking eye contact. When it was close enough, it sniffed the air, then the croissant. Then gently, so gently it barely made a sound, it took the bread from his hand. Not snatching, not gulping. Eating like it remembered manners, like it had once been taught to wait, to be polite. Johnny felt something shift inside him. It wasn't pity. Pity was easy and temporary. This was heavier. It was the feeling you get when you stumble onto something that wasn't meant for you. But now it is. He crouched down, slowly, giving the dog space to back away if it wanted. It didn't. It finished the croissant, then sat on its haunches, tail curled around its paws. Not wagging, just present. Up close, Johnny could see more. A raw patch on the dog's neck, where fur had been rubbed or scraped away, a thin scar along its flank, and around its neck, barely hanging on, was a collar. Not the kind with a name tag or a bell. This one was plain black, worn almost smooth. But as Johnny leaned in, squinting in the low light, he saw something etched into the leather near the buckle. Faint but there, 2 words, and a number. Project Aegis, Subject 7, he frowned. It didn't sound like a pet name. It sounded clinical, cold, like something from a lab report, not a dog park. His mind started turning. He'd heard rumors over the years, whispers about underground testing facilities, about animals used in experiments and then discarded when they were no longer useful. He'd always assumed those were just urban legends, the kind of stories people tell to feel like the world is more sinister than it really is. But this felt real. The dog tilted its head as if sensing his shift in mood. It let out a soft sigh, then rested its chin on Johnny's knee. The gesture was so trusting, so simple, that it nearly knocked the breath out of him. He glanced up and down the alley. No one was around, just the hum of distant traffic and the occasional drip of water from a broken gutter. For a moment he considered walking away. He had a life, a schedule, people expecting him back. Getting involved with a stray dog, especially one that might be tied to something dangerous, wasn't smart. It wasn't safe. But then the dog looked up at him again, and Johnny knew he wasn't going to walk away. He reached out slowly and ran his fingers along the dog's back. The fur was coarse with dirt, but underneath the muscle was still there, strong, resilient. This dog had survived, and now it had chosen him. "All right," Johnny said softly, more to himself than to the dog. "All right then." He stood up, took off his jacket, and draped it gently over the dog's thin frame. The animal didn't resist. It just leaned into the warmth, eyes half closed now, as if it finally felt safe enough to rest. Johnny pulled out his phone, not to call anyone, not yet, but to check the time. Almost midnight. He knew a vet, not the fancy kind with marble floors and appointment wait lists, the other kind, the kind who worked out of a converted garage in Montmartre, who treated street cats for free and never asked questions about where injured animals came from. He'd call her in the morning. For now, he needed to get this dog somewhere dry, somewhere quiet. He knelt again and held out his arms. The dog hesitated for just a second, then stepped forward and let Johnny lift it. It was lighter than he expected, but solid, real, alive. As he walked out of the alley, the rain easing into a mist, the dog nestled against his chest like it had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. Johnny didn't know what Project Aegis was. He didn't know who had done this to the animal in his arms. But he knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it wasn't over, and he wasn't going to let it end in a dark alley. The streets of Paris stretched ahead, quiet and glistening. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played a lonely tune from an open window. Johnny adjusted his hold on the dog and kept walking, toward warmth, toward answers, toward something he couldn't yet name, but felt in his bones was important. The night had started as a simple walk to clear his head. It was turning into something else entirely. Back in his temporary flat, a quiet book-filled space tucked above a shuttered antique shop, Johnny laid the dog down on an old quilt near the radiator. The animal didn't protest. It just curled into itself, shivering slightly, eyes heavy but watchful. Rain still clung to its fur in damp clumps, and the scent of wet earth and something faintly chemical hung in the air. Johnny moved quietly, not wanting to startle it. He filled a bowl with fresh water and set it nearby. The dog sniffed it once, then drank slowly, carefully, as if it had learned not to gulp too fast. He watched, arms crossed, leaning against the kitchen counter. There was something about the way it moved, deliberate, almost trained, that didn't fit with the usual chaos of a street stray. He grabbed a clean towel from the linen closet and knelt beside the dog again. "Easy now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if the words were for the dog or for himself. Gently he began to dry its coat, working from the shoulders down. The dog stayed still, only flinching once when the towel brushed the raw patch on its neck. Johnny paused. "Sorry," he whispered. He leaned closer, squinting in the warm lamplight. The wound wasn't fresh, it was healing, but poorly. Around the edges, the skin was tight and pink, like it had been rubbed raw over and over. And just beneath it, almost hidden by matted fur, was that collar again. He hadn't noticed before how tightly it fit. Not choking, but snug, like it had been sized precisely, not just tossed on. Curious, he reached for the buckle. It was stiff, rusted in places, but after a few careful tugs, it came loose. He slid the collar off slowly. The dog exhaled as if relieved and rested its head on its paws. Johnny turned the collar over in his hands. The leather was worn, but not from weather. It looked like it had been handled often, rubbed, adjusted, maybe even tested. And there, near the clasp, stamped faintly but clearly, were the words he'd glimpsed in the alley. Project Aegis, Subject 7. He ran his thumb over the engraving. It wasn't scratched in by hand. It was too clean, too uniform, machine-stamped, official. A cold prickle ran down his spine. He'd seen enough films, read enough news to know that when animals had numbers instead of names, it usually meant they'd been part of something they never agreed to. Labs, testing, experiments, places where living things became data points. He'd always hated that. Hated the idea that anything with a heartbeat could be reduced to a subject number, but this wasn't just a theory anymore. This was real, and it was sitting right in front of him, breathing softly on his floor. He set the collar aside and went to the small desk by the window. His laptop was there, screen dark. He opened it, waited for it to wake, then typed Project Aegis into the search bar. Nothing useful came up at first. A few references to Greek mythology, Aegis being the shield of Zeus, a defunct tech startup in Berlin, a military drone prototype mentioned in a defense blog from 2018. None of it felt connected. He tried adding animal testing to the search. Still mostly noise. Then he added France and canine. That's when something shifted. A forum post from 6 years ago appeared near the bottom of the page. The thread was titled, "What Really Happened at the Lion Biodynamics Lab?" The post itself was short, written in broken English, but the details were chilling. The user claimed to have worked as a night janitor at a private research facility outside Lyon. Said they'd seen dogs, mostly shepherds and mixes, kept in small, soundproofed rooms. Each had a tattoo behind the ear and a numbered collar. They called the program Project Aegis, purpose unknown, funding source anonymous. The post ended with, "They disappeared one night. All of them. Lab shut down next week. No explanation. I kept quiet, but I still hear them barking in my dreams." Johnny stared at the screen. His pulse was steady, but his hands felt heavy. He scrolled down. Only 2 replies. One said, "Sounds like a conspiracy theory." The other, "I saw a dog like that near Dijon last year. Same tattoo, same look in its eyes." He clicked on the second user's profile. It was deleted. He sat back, rubbing his temples. Coincidence? Maybe. But the dog on his floor had that exact tattoo, just behind the left ear, a tiny series of numbers and letters, almost invisible unless you knew to look. He'd noticed it when drying the fur near the neck. He'd thought it was a scar at first. Now he knew better. This wasn't just a lost pet. This was an escapee. And if the lab had shut down years ago, why was this dog still wearing its collar? Why hadn't someone removed it? Unless it had run away recently. Or unless the project never really ended. He glanced over at the dog. It was watching him again, ears perked slightly as if it understood the weight of what he was thinking. Johnny stood and walked to the kitchen. He filled a small pot with water and set it on the stove. He didn't feel hungry, but he needed to do something with his hands. He found some plain rice in the cupboard and a can of chicken. Nothing fancy, just something gentle on a stressed stomach. While it cooked, he called the only person he trusted with weird, messy situations. She answered on the second ring. "You never call this late unless something's wrong." "It's not wrong," he said. "But it's complicated." He told her about the dog, the alley, the collar, the tattoo, the forum post. He didn't dramatize it, just laid out the facts, quiet and steady. There was a long pause on the other end. "Then bring it to me tomorrow morning. First thing. Don't post anything. Don't tell anyone else. And Johnny, don't let it out of your sight." "I won't." He hung up and turned off the stove. The rice was ready. He mixed it with the chicken, let it cool, then placed a small portion in a clean bowl. The dog ate slowly, gratefully, but without desperation, like it remembered what it was like to be fed on a schedule. After it finished, Johnny sat on the floor beside it. He didn't pet it right away, just sat there letting the silence settle between them. Outside, the city hummed. Tires on wet pavement, a distant siren, the occasional laugh from a late-night bar down the block. Normal sounds. But inside, everything felt different. He reached out and gently touched the dog's head. It leaned into his hand, eyes closing for just a second. "You didn't ask for any of this, did you?" he said softly. The dog opened its eyes again and looked at him. Not with fear, not with hope, but with something quieter. Trust, maybe, or maybe just the simple understanding that they were in this together now. Johnny stayed on the floor until the radiator clicked off and the room grew still. He didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words, Subject 7 Bison, stamped into that worn leather. He thought about who had put it there, who had decided this dog was just a number, and who might still be looking for it. By dawn, gray light seeped through the curtains. The dog was asleep, curled tightly, one paw twitching like it was running in a dream. Johnny watched it for a long time. Then he stood, packed a small bag, and prepared to leave. He wasn't just taking a dog to the vet. He was stepping into something bigger, something hidden. And he had a feeling that once he saw what was underneath, there'd be no pretending it didn't exist, but that was okay. Some truths needed someone to look them in the eye, and Johnny had never been one to look away. The morning air was sharp with the kind of chill that clings to your skin even after you've zipped your jacket. Johnny walked quickly but not hurriedly, the dog trotting beside him on a borrowed leash. Simple nylon, no tags, nothing flashy. He'd wrapped the animal in an old scarf to hide the worst of its condition from curious eyes, though the dog didn't seem to mind the attention. It moved with a quiet dignity, as if it knew exactly where it was going, even though it had never been down this street before. They turned onto a narrow lane in Montmartre, past a bakery just opening its shutters, the scent of warm croissants spilling into the street. A few early risers nodded politely as they passed, but no one stopped them. That was the thing about Paris. If you walked like you belonged, most people assumed you did. The vet's place wasn't marked with a sign. Just a plain blue door beneath a wrought iron balcony heavy with ivy. Johnny pressed the buzzer once. A voice crackled through the intercom. Low, calm, familiar. 3rd floor. Inside, the building smelled of old wood and lavender. The stairs creaked underfoot, but the dog didn't flinch. It climbed each step steadily, tail low but not tucked. When they reached the top, the door was already open. She stood in the doorway, mid-50s, silver-streaked hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing a faded sweater and rubber clogs. No white coat, no clipboard. Just a woman who'd spent decades patching up the forgotten and the broken, both human and animal. "You brought a ghost," she said, eyes fixed on the dog. Johnny didn't answer right away. He just stepped inside, and the dog followed without hesitation. The apartment doubled as a clinic. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with medical texts and dog-eared novels. A small examination table sat in the corner, next to a cabinet of supplies. In the far room, a calico cat blinked sleepily from a sunlit windowsill. Everything felt lived in, warm, safe. "Let me see him," she said, kneeling slowly. The dog approached her cautiously, sniffed her hand, then sat. She ran her fingers gently over its ribs, checked its gums, lifted one paw at a time. Her movements were practiced but tender, like she was handling something fragile, not just physically, but emotionally. After a few minutes, she sat back on her heels. "He's malnourished, dehydrated, and his neck's been rubbed raw from that collar. But he's not feral. He's been trained. Or conditioned." She looked up at Johnny. "You said something about a tattoo?" Johnny nodded. "Behind the left ear." She parted the fur carefully. There it was, small, precise, almost surgical. A7419. "Not just a number," she murmured. "A code." She went to her desk and pulled out a thick binder labeled Unverified Cases, 2016 present. Flipping through pages filled with handwritten notes, grainy photos and printed emails, she stopped at a section marked Lion Area, Canine Subjects. She tapped a photo. It showed a dog, different breed, lighter coat, but with the same tattoo placement, same collar style. "This came to me 3 years ago," she said, "found near a decommissioned warehouse. It died 2 days later, organ failure. Toxicology showed traces of experimental neuroinhibitors. Not legal." "Not even close." Johnny felt his stomach tighten. "So this isn't isolated?" "No," she said quietly. "It's a pattern." She turned to the dog, now lying calmly on a blanket she'd spread on the floor. "He's lucky. Whatever they were testing, he either wasn't dosed long enough or he's resistant. Either way, he survived." Johnny crouched beside the dog and stroked its back. "What do we do now?" "We keep him safe," she said. "And we find out who's still running this." She walked to a locked drawer, pulled out a small digital camera, and took clear photos of the tattoo, the collar, the wound on the neck. Then she handed Johnny a flash drive. "Everything I have on Project Aegis is on here. Old reports, contacts, fragments of lab manifests someone leaked years ago. Most of it's circumstantial, but it's a start. Johnny took the drive. It felt heavier than it should. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? He asked. Because they're ghosts, she said. The original lab shut down after a whistleblower tried to go public. He disappeared a week later. No body, no charges. After that, everyone got quiet. But animals kept showing up, scattered, alone, always with the same markings. Different cities, different countries. Someone still running tests, maybe under a new name, maybe in the shadows. She paused, then added, and if they find out this dog is alive and talking, so to speak, they'll come for him. Johnny looked at the dog, now dozing lightly, one ear twitching at the sound of rain starting again outside. Then we make sure they don't. Over the next few hours, while the dog rested, Johnny sat at the kitchen table with the flash drive plugged into his laptop. The files were a mess. Scanned documents with redacted lines, encrypted emails, blurry surveillance photos. But one name kept appearing in the margins. Dr. Laurent Vasseur, former lead researcher at Lion Biodynamics, listed as deceased in official records. But a grainy photo from a conference in Geneva 2 years ago showed a man who looked exactly like him, standing beside a man in a dark suit with a badge that read, Nexora Solutions. Johnny typed Nexora Solutions into a new tab. The company website was sleek, professional, innovating ethical biotechnologies for a safer tomorrow. They specialized in non-invasive behavioral modulation and adaptive neural response systems. Vague enough to mean anything. Dangerous enough to mean everything. He dug deeper. Buried in a Swiss business registry, he found that Nexora had acquired the old Lion Biodynamics property 18 months ago, under a shell corporation. The purchase was legal, quiet, and complete. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't just a ghost story anymore. It was active, ongoing. He thought about the dog, Subject 7, sleeping just a few feet away. Had it been locked in a cage, injected with chemicals, forced to endure things no living thing should? And if it had escaped? How many others hadn't? He closed the laptop and walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the rooftops of Paris into soft watercolor shapes. He felt that familiar pull, the one that came when you knew something was wrong and you had the chance to do something about it. Not because you wanted to be a hero, but because you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't try. He turned back to the room. I need to get this information to someone who can actually do something with it. The vet nodded. There's a journalist. Used to cover corporate corruption. Got run out of mainstream media after she exposed a pharmaceutical cover-up. Now she runs an independent outlet. She's careful, smart, and she doesn't scare easy. Do you trust her? With my life, the woman said. And with his. She wrote down a name and a secure email address on a scrap of paper. Johnny folded it and tucked it into his pocket. By late afternoon, the dog was stronger. It drank water on its own, ate a full meal, and even wagged its tail just once when Johnny scratched behind its ears. It wasn't the frantic, hopeful wag of a rescued stray. It was quieter, deeper, like it finally believed it was safe. Johnny knew he couldn't keep it with him. His place wasn't secure. Cameras, fans, paparazzi, it was too exposed. But the vet couldn't keep it long-term either. She had other patients, and her location was known in certain circles. There's a place, she said, as if reading his thoughts, an old farm outside Chartres, run by a former investigative reporter turned animal sanctuary operator. She takes in cases like this, no questions, no records, just safety. Will they be able to find him there? Only if we tell them, she said. And we won't. Johnny looked at the dog, now standing by the door, watching him with those steady eyes. It wasn't just waiting for food or shelter. It was waiting for him to decide. He knelt and put his forehead against the dog's. You've been through enough, he whispered. Now it's my turn. He spent the next hour packing a small bag, food, the collar, the photos, the flash drive. The vet gave him a sealed envelope with medical notes and a microchip scanner, just in case. Everything was done quietly, efficiently, like they were preparing for a mission, not a simple transfer. As they stepped back out into the damp evening, the dog walked between them, calm and alert. The city lights flickered on one by one, casting long reflections on the wet pavement. Somewhere above, a plane cut through the clouds, heading somewhere far away. But Johnny wasn't thinking about escape. He was thinking about exposure, Because secrets like this only stay hidden as long as no one dares to shine a light. And he'd just lit the match. The drive to the sanctuary took just under 2 hours, winding through countryside roads slick with recent rain. Johnny kept the windows cracked, letting in the smell of wet grass and distant wood smoke. The dog sat quietly in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket, eyes fixed on the passing fields and trees as if memorizing every turn. It didn't whine, didn't pace. Just watched the world go by like it was seeing it for the first time. And maybe it was. The farm sat at the end of a gravel lane, hidden behind a row of old oaks. No sign marked the entrance, just a rusted gate with a hand-painted symbol, a paw print inside a circle. Johnny pulled up, rolled down his window, and pressed the intercom button mounted on a post. A voice came through, calm and unhurried. "State your name and purpose, Johnny," he said. "I'm here with a friend." From the vet in Montmartre, there was a pause. Then the gate creaked open slowly. The house was modest, stone walls, ivy climbing the chimney, smoke curling from the stovepipe. Chickens pecked near the garden, and 2 older dogs lounged on the porch, lifting their heads as the car approached but not bothering to stand. This wasn't a rescue with bright signs and donation bins. It was a refuge, a place built on silence and trust. A woman stepped out, late 50s, maybe early 60s, wearing boots caked with mud and a thick wool sweater. Her hair was pulled back, her face lined with years of sun and worry, but her eyes were sharp, kind, and full of quiet strength. She didn't shake hands, just nodded at Johnny, then looked at the dog. "He's been through something," she said, not as a question. "Yes," Johnny replied. She opened the car door gently. The dog hesitated for only a second before stepping out. It sniffed the air, then the ground, then walked slowly toward her. She crouched, let it smell her hand, then ran her fingers along its spine. "Strong heart," she murmured. Scared but not broken, Johnny handed her the envelope from the vet. She took it without opening it. "I don't need to know everything," she said. "Just enough to keep him safe." They walked together toward a small barn converted into a recovery space. Warm, dry, lined with soft bedding and toys that looked well-loved but not new. Other animals were there too. A 3-legged cat, a rabbit with one ear, a goat that limped but still trotted over to say hello. None of them barked or hissed. They just existed, peacefully, like they'd all agreed to leave their past at the gate. She showed Johnny where food and water were kept, how the heating worked, where the emergency kit was stored. Then she turned to him. "You can stay tonight if you need to," she offered. "But if you're going back to the city—" "Be careful," Johnny frowned. "Why?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to a small desk in the corner and pulled out a printed photo, a grainy image from a traffic camera near his Paris flat, time-stamped 2 nights ago. In it, a black sedan with tinted windows idled across the street from his building. "No plates visible. I got this from a contact," she said. "They've been watching your place since yesterday morning." Johnny's stomach dropped. He hadn't noticed. Hadn't seen anything unusual, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. "Who are they?" he asked. "People who don't like loose ends," she said simply. "And that dog? He's a very big loose end." Johnny looked back at the animal, now lying on a thick mat, eyes half closed but ears still alert. It hadn't made a sound since arriving, but its body was relaxed in a way it hadn't been before, like it knew deep down that this place was different. He stayed for dinner. Thick vegetable stew, crusty bread, strong tea. They didn't talk much, just ate in comfortable silence, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Afterward, he helped refill water bowls and checked the barn doors. The dog followed him quietly, never more than a few steps behind. Before he left, the woman handed him a burner phone. "Use this to call if you need to, and don't use your regular phone for anything related to this. Assume it's being watched," he nodded. "I sent the files to the journalist this morning, encrypted. She said she'd start digging." "Good," the woman said. "But remember, once the story breaks, they'll move fast. They'll deny, distract, maybe even disappear the evidence. You've got to be ready for that." Johnny drove back to Paris under a sky full of stars. The city felt different now. Not magical, not romantic, but watchful. Every parked car, every figure on a corner, every flicker of movement in his rearview mirror made him tense. He wasn't paranoid. He was careful. There was a difference. Back in his flat, he double-checked the locks, closed the curtains, and powered down his main phone. He used the burner to send one last message to the journalist. Subject 7 is safe, but they're already looking. Her reply came minutes later. I've got a source inside Nexora. Meeting tomorrow. If what you sent is real, this could blow wide open. He didn't sleep much that night. Instead, he sat by the window watching the street below. At 3 a.m., a car slowed as it passed his building. Not a taxi, not a delivery van. Just a dark sedan that lingered a little too long before turning the corner. He didn't call the police. He knew better. If Nexora had ties to government contracts or private security firms, as the files suggested, they'd have friends in places that could make problems vanish before they even started. No, this wasn't a job for official channels. This was a job for truth. The next morning, he avoided his usual cafe, took a different route to rehearsal, left his phone in a locker. He moved like a shadow, not because he was hiding, but because he was protecting something bigger than himself. By midday, the journalist published her first piece. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic headlines. Just a calm, meticulously sourced article titled, Project Aegis, The Dogs That Vanished and the Lab That Never Closed. It included blurred photos of the tattoo, redacted documents showing Nexora's purchase of the Lion facility, and an anonymous quote from a former technician. They called them subjects, not animals. Said they were necessary for progress, but you could hear them crying at night, even through the soundproof walls. Within hours, the story was shared across independent news platforms, animal rights groups, and whistleblower forums. Comments poured in, some skeptical, some furious, some heartbroken. A few claimed it was fake, but others said, Sean, I saw a dog like that last year. Or my cousin worked there. He quit and never spoke again. Then came the backlash. Nexora issued a statement calling the report baseless, fiction, and a smear campaign by anti-science activists. They claimed their work focused on non-invasive behavioral studies with full ethical oversight, but they refused to release any facility records or allow independent inspections. That only made people dig deeper. By evening, a second source came forward, a lab assistant who'd fled Switzerland after being pressured to falsify data. She provided internal emails showing that Project Aegis had been rebranded as Neural Harmony Initiative, but the protocols were nearly identical. Dogs were still being used, still being numbered, still disappearing. Johnny read it all on the burner phone, sitting in a park far from his usual haunts. The dog, now unofficially named Chance by the sanctuary keeper, was safe. But the storm was just beginning, and then, late that night, his regular phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You have something that belongs to us. Return it and no one gets hurt. He stared at the screen, didn't reply, just powered the phone off and dropped it into a public trash bin on his way home. He knew then that they weren't just watching. They were coming. But Johnny wasn't alone anymore. The story was out. People were paying attention, and somewhere in a quiet barn outside Chartres, a dog with a numbered tattoo slept peacefully, no longer a subject, no longer a secret, but a living witness, and witnesses, once protected, can change everything. The raid happened at dawn, not with sirens or shouting, but with quiet efficiency. Black vans rolling up the long driveway outside Lion, boots on gravel, flashlights cutting through the morning mist. Authorities moved fast, guided by evidence that had been buried for years but now couldn't be ignored. Inside the facility, they found cages, empty ones mostly, but still stained, still smelling of antiseptic and fear. Files had been shredded, computers wiped, but not well enough. Hidden backups, mislabeled storage drives, even handwritten logs tucked behind wall panels told the real story. And then, in a locked side room, they found them, 7 dogs, thin, shaken, but alive. Each one had the same tattoo, the same numbered collar, Subject 3, Subject 9, Subject 12, and so on. No Subject 7, but they'd seen his photo in the report. They knew he'd made it out. News of the raid spread before the sun was fully up. By mid-morning, it was everywhere, on international wires, social feeds, even the evening news. Not as a conspiracy theory, but as fact. Verified. Undeniable. The kind of story that doesn't just make people angry, it makes them act. Nexora Solutions shut down operations within 48 hours. Executives vanished into legal teams. Dr. Laurent Vasseur was arrested at a private airfield trying to leave the country. The Neural Harmony Initiative was exposed for what it really was: a continuation of cruel, unregulated experiments disguised as innovation. Governments launched investigations. Animal welfare groups mobilized. Donations poured into sanctuaries across Europe. And through it all, Johnny stayed quiet. He didn't give interviews, didn't post about it online, didn't stand on any podiums. He knew his involvement would only distract from the real story, the dogs, the truth, the people who'd risked everything to expose it. So he let the facts speak for themselves. But that didn't mean he disappeared. A week after the raid, he drove back to the farm outside Chartres. The air was crisp, the fields golden with late autumn light. As he turned down the gravel lane, he saw Chance waiting by the gate, tail low at first, then lifting slowly as he recognized the car. By the time Johnny stepped out, the dog was trotting toward him, not running, not frantic, just steady and sure, like he'd been expecting this visit all along. He didn't jump or bark, just stood there looking up with those deep, calm eyes as if to say, "You came back." Johnny knelt and let Chance press his head into his chest. No words needed. Just presence. Just trust. The woman who ran the sanctuary came out onto the porch holding 2 mugs of tea. "He asks for you," she said simply. "Not every day. But sometimes when it rains or when the wind blows from the east, he sits by the gate and waits." Johnny smiled faintly. "He's got good instincts." They sat on the porch steps, sipping tea while Chance lay between them, soaking up the weak sunlight. Chickens clucked in the distance. A breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. It was peaceful, real, the kind of quiet that feels earned. "He's healing," she said after a while, physically mostly. "But the rest, that takes time. And safety. He's got both now." Johnny watched Chance's chest rise and fall, slow and even. "Do you think he remembers?" "Not like we do," she said. "But his body remembers. The way he flinches at sudden noises. The way he watches doors. But he's learning. Every day he chooses to trust a little more." They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Johnny reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a legal document, simple, clean, no fancy language. He handed it to her. She read it slowly. Then looked up, surprised. "You're funding a foundation?" "Not me alone," he said. "But I'm helping start it. For animals used in research, especially the ones no one wants to talk about. Medical rehab, lifetime care, legal advocacy. And a promise, no more secret labs. No more numbered subjects." She studied him for a long moment. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. "But someone had to." She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "He'll be part of it, you know. Not as a symbol, but as proof that they can heal. That they deserve more than to be forgotten." Johnny reached down and scratched behind Chance's ears. The dog sighed, eyes closing for just a second. Later, as Johnny prepared to leave, Chance walked with him to the car. He didn't try to follow, just stood by the open door watching, as if memorizing the shape of Johnny's face one more time. "You don't have to stay with me," Johnny said softly. "You're safe here. That's enough." Chance tilted his head, then gave a single, slow wag of his tail. Just once, like a period at the end of a sentence. Johnny got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, he saw Chance turn and walk back toward the house, head high, step sure. Not running from anything anymore, just walking toward what came next. Back in Paris, life returned to its usual rhythm. Rehearsals, quiet walks, late-night coffee. But something had shifted. Johnny noticed it in small ways. The way he paused when he saw a stray dog, not just to look, but to really see it. The way he listened more closely to stories people told about things that didn't feel right. The way he no longer assumed someone else would step in. Because sometimes, the person who steps in is just someone who happened to be walking by on a rainy night. Months passed. The foundation grew quietly, steadily. Sanctuaries joined. Veterinarians volunteered. Former lab workers came forward with testimony, protected by anonymity but united by guilt and hope. Laws began to change. Oversight tightened. The phrase ethical research started to mean something again, and every few weeks Johnny returned to the farm. Sometimes Chance greeted him with excitement. Sometimes he was busy chasing butterflies or napping in the sun. But he always knew Johnny was there, and he always came over eventually as if to say, "I remember you, and I'm still here." One afternoon as they sat together under an old apple tree, Johnny watched Chance trot after a falling leaf, pounce on it like it was the most important thing in the world, then carry it back in his mouth like a prize. He dropped it at Johnny's feet and sat proudly, tail thumping the grass. Johnny laughed, really laughed, for the first time in a long while. In that moment there were no labs, no numbers, no shadows. Just a dog who had been lost and was now found, not because of fame or fortune, but because one person stopped walking, looked down and chose to care. The world kept turning. Headlines faded, new scandals rose and fell. But in that quiet corner of France, something lasting had taken root. Not just in policy or paperwork, but in the simple act of kindness that refused to look away. And every time Johnny saw Chance run across the field, ears flapping, tongue out, utterly free, he knew it had all been worth it, not because he'd changed the world, but because he'd helped one small part of it heal.